this and probably Agile are the two biggest things that, in my opinion, led to DevOps. So 1984, you've got theory of constraints. Kind of throughout the 80s and onwards, you've got this idea of lean manufacturing, which is really popularized by Toyota. Out of this kind of came Kanban boards, which we've probably all seen, sort of this visible way to limit the amount of work in progress that you have. Value streams mapping, which I won't really get into. We've probably all heard of this, Agile, kind of the de facto way of developing software versus waterfall these days. And I'll actually pop open this link really quick for those of you who haven't had the chance to see this gorgeous website. Maybe. So this is agilemanifesto.org. Gorgeous website. I think there were 17 people there, though it doesn't look like there's 17 people in the picture. So basically the idea here is you're valuing the things on the left, these sort of 4 bullet points, more than the things on the right. As Alan has pointed out to me and others before, that doesn't mean you don't value the things on the right, such as contract negotiation, processes and stuff, but you choose to value the things on the left more. And another sort of big part of Agile is delivering working software frequently, kind of like an MVP. Casey, you've probably talked about that a lot in ideation lately, as well as to deliver your software in smaller batch sizes. So, maybe waterfall, you deliver your software once at the very end after 2 years of planning and kind of working away through that waterfall. Whereas in Agile, maybe you're delivering your software, every 4 weeks or 2 weeks, every, sprint. Let me go back here. So jumping forward 8 years, there's probably some other stuff that happened in here. This is just selected my timeline, Joe's timeline of DevOps. There's, I'm sure, other stuff that's more important. But so this was actually a presentation, 10+ deploys per day, DevOps and cooperation at Flickr, by some fellows named John Allspaw and Paul Hammond. I've never met them. I don't really know much about them beyond this video, but they worked at Flickr. And they basically talk about a lot of the ideas that really sort of were DevOps ideas, but they didn't use the word DevOps. It wasn't really a word at the time, but a lot of what they talked about, the work they had done at Flickr, was about sort of tearing down this wall in between dev and ops and sort of bringing those teams together, removing the animosity between them. And they talked about a few tools that they used, things that we probably, and I took kind of for granted, had just sort of always been there. But again, some people in the room and online probably know that they have not always been there. Things like automated infrastructure, version control, one-step build and deploy, feature flags, shared metrics. And this is my favorite one because it was worth pointing out in their presentation, which just kind of, I think, goes to show you 2009 versus now, was IRC, or IMing, which is just like, now it's almost we've gone too much the other way. Like, I get too many Slack messages. Yeah. Please stop talking to me because I need to get work done. But anyways, at the time, being able to, hey, devs can instantly message ops and ops can instantly message devs. And we've got this beautiful communication going back and forth. Some other ideas that they talked about in their presentation was that, or a couple quotes, I'll say, the business requires change, but change is the root cause of most outages. So, you might think that, okay, changes are bad, so we're going to make changes every 6 months instead of every 2 weeks. It's sort of a natural conclusion you might draw, but it's the wrong conclusion. Like, if changes are bad, then let's actually make changes happen more often so that we can get a better handle around like what risk factors, and we can mitigate those, come up with plans to make our changes happen in a successful manner. So that's kind of some things they talk about. It's like a 45-minute video. I'd encourage you to check it out at some point. It's a good watch. 2010, you've got the inaugural DevOps Days conference in Belgium. I only really include this because I think that's sort of where DevOps was really first coined. Again, in 2010, I was in middle school, so I could be wrong. Yeah.
That's sad. That's Jason making that comment.
Oh, your birthday was the other day, right? Yeah. 2013, you've got the book I mentioned, The Phoenix Project, was released. This is really, I think, a book that pushed a lot of people to sort of learn more about DevOps, and it gave you a very hands-on, you've again got a fictional character who's learning what is DevOps, and you get to kind of read along with them. We did a book club here a couple months ago through that. I'm trying not to take up your time, Reese, so I'll try and pick up the pace here.
Okay, we're good.
Culminating in, you guessed it, 2023 Intro to DevOps and Lunch and Learn. Nothing else happened between 2013 and 2023.
Nothing important.
Yeah. AI, never heard of it. But Lunch and Learn, yes. Okay. So here's where I'm going to take a quick break. Well, not a break, but I just want to ask a question. And yeah, someone has to answer. What's your job as a software engineer? Anyone? Casey, you're making eye contact. What's your job?
Develop software and deliver it to a customer.
Thank you, Casey. No, not true. No, we all knew that was going to happen. Don't you love it? So, and this is just kind of cheeky, but your job as a software developer and my job and everyone's job is to provide value to the business. And that's where a lot of these ideas come from. Our job is not necessarily to sit on a computer and code for 40 hours a day and yeet stuff over the proverbial wall to ops to deal with. Our job is to provide value to the business. And what that looks like is getting software not just out of our plate and like committed to main, but deployed all the way through. At least that's, you know, I think kind of what DevOps speaks to. Maybe in a non-DevOpsy, non-agile kind of world, your job is just to write code and yeet it over the wall. And then, yeah, it's a very blanket statement. There's a lot you can nitpick. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of ways that's probably not true, but we're gonna pretend that's yeah.
Yes. No yeeting.
What time are we at? 12:18. All right, I'm gonna really pick it up here and probably skip some stuff. So last thing I'll talk about before I hand it over to Reese. So this is something that the Phoenix Project introduces, the DevOps Handbook, sort of a follow-up book that goes more in detail to what is introduced in the Phoenix Project, is this idea of the 3 ways of DevOps. It sounds very like kind of voodoo ninja-y, but it's got some good stuff in it. I think Reese, you said it's kind of like a Yoda thing, like the 3 ways. Use the force. So we've got the first way, which is basically you've got on your left dev, on your right ops, also on your left sort of the business, on the right the customer. So as we move left to right, that is us delivering value from dev to ops and ultimately to the customer. And so it says systems thinking. Basically, the idea there is that we are not focused on local optimas. For example, how quickly can I push code to main, but we're focused on the performance of the entire system being from the moment we get an idea for how to provide value to our customer to that idea pushed all the way to production and actually providing said value. When something is committed to main, that might not necessarily even be providing value at that point in time if it's not deployed. You know, maybe you have some deploy steps. Maybe you've got a fully automated process and it deploys it out. But yeah, some, I guess, practices. This is the practice part around this first way for maximizing flow or thinking about the system as a whole. Making work visible, Kanban boards, great way to do that. Ideally, your stakeholders have insight into the Kanban board and can watch the thing that they care about and move across the board. Reducing batch sizes. That would maybe be making your user story smaller. Instead of a 40-pointer, maybe you have 2 20-pointers, or even better, like a couple 5 and 3 and 8-pointers, or whatever. Reducing the intervals of work as well. Maybe you have a sprint length. What does Alan call it? Scrum waterfall or
Scrumfall?
Scrumfall, yeah. So maybe you have a sprint length of 6 months. That's your agile sprint length. Maybe you think about reducing that down to a month or 2 weeks. That would be another way of sort of maximizing your flow through the system. Another great way, or another idea here, is preventing the flow of defects, or CRUD. Not CRUD as in an API. That is a bad choice of words. But preventing the flow of garbage from being passed downstream. So in this case, it would be from dev to ops. Some ways to do that: test-driven development. You're, testing your code before you throw it over the wall. I know I'm saying throw it over the wall a lot. I feel like in 2023, not always as common, but still out there. So that brings us to the second way, which is to amplify feedback loops. And I will be upfront. I feel like this is the one that I least understand, even though I've read about it a lot. But basically your goal here is to enhance or be able to detect problems faster and prevent them in the long run. I think the phrase shift left plays into this as well, where you're getting, if you're shifting left, maybe you're writing unit tests that you can run locally instead of waiting till it's in prod. Maybe you've got some static security analysis tools that run in your IDE. So before that security bug made it all the way out to prod, you've actually detected it locally with something like SemGrep, which maybe we'll talk about later. Not today, later. Another idea here, and Reese, feel free to chime in because we were chatting about this earlier, is kind of this idea of swarming problems. So say your production system is like completely kaput, you instead of just, okay, like Ted, you're gonna go fix prod, this idea that everybody kind of stops everything and goes to to fix the problem in production. And the reason there is basically that you're creating this sort of knowledge that everyone on the team understands and is able to prevent from happening again in the future. Do you want to add anything there?
I think you have a slide later, but I guess one of the things I can mention is like early on in my career, this is before like even CI was a kind of a mainstream. The build was sort of like this sacred thing, and if you broke it, then bad things would happen. It was like everybody had to stop working. We got to get that build going, because if we don't, it's basically stopped the whole process. So
if you broke the build, you were, you lived in shame for,
Yeah.
a day or something.
right, yeah, you had to shame those cast.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out, yeah, I was always pointing fingers, right? Like who tried to figure out, spend, maybe an hour or two trying to figure out who broke it, so you can say, it was you. So, yeah.
We've got a wonderful slide on that.
Yeah.
in
there's
just a
something
minute.
there.
So
I think there's also the idea of, making testing more visible. Rather than it being buried, make it part of the CI/CD process. Not just CI or when you're building, but also making tests visible and analysis visible. Again, we take it sort of as second nature, but initially it was like, hey, there's feedback here, but we're not getting it. Or you get it secondhand, or you get it tertiary, or the security team is going to give you a report that you may or may not look at, right? Or the code analysis team is going to generate some report and they'll give it to you and give you 10 things to fix, and you never get them into your backlog. So I think that shift left is an idea. And then also it really depends on the product too, because or the system you're building, because sometimes monitoring and measuring in production is really, really valuable, and it's great for the development team. Even customer teams sometimes, product management teams to see that stuff. A lot of the systems that we built, and there isn't it doesn't resonate as much. The logging, we pretty much know what's going on with the system in production, but still the idea that product management is considering how is this thing operating with our customers, and including that in the next feature, rather than just focusing on whatever their next favorite feature is to build, but including, hey, how are the customers actually using this? Are they able to scroll correctly or not? And maybe we ought to fix scrolling. That's just rather than just assuming that scrolling is done and we can go on to our next feature, for example. The other thing I'm going to suggest, now that I've spoken for a little bit, is maybe we take today's session and we break it into two. So rather than, trying to rush through the rest of this discussion, which I think is awesome, maybe we, don't go so aggressive and we give ourselves a little bit of time and relax. This is just a lunch and learn, We don't want to have people get indigestion. So just something for you guys to consider.
Well, we'll see how we're at it time, but maybe the tool part could be a separate lunch and learn, and you could do the case study.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Sorry, I've
Okay.
taken over your lunch and learn.
No, we get another meeting. So cool. Relax, Joseph.
So stay tuned in July for our next meeting.
Okay.
Well, in that case, I'll just slow it way down. It's okay.
Slow way down.
So Thank you, Phil.
Cheers.
So that brings us to the third way, which in my mind is really the first two. You can almost get away with sort of changing your practices without really changing your culture to an extent. But the third way is where if you're not willing to change your company culture, you're really not going to be able to knock this one out of the park or make too much progress. Because the third way is really, as it says, culture of continual experimentation and learning. And what that kind of means is creating a high trust culture. So I'm going to read a quote here from the DevOps handbook that is dynamic, disciplined, and takes a scientific approach to experimentation and risk taking. Read, not cowboy risk taking, like, oh, I'm gonna try this in prod, oh, it's gonna be great. No, but basically, if we've hit these first two waves, what we've effectively done is we've reduced our feedback loop. If you're doing good at those first two waves, and if your feedback loop is really short, like a week or 2 weeks or even less, where a customer requests something or we have an idea for a feature, and we can, if we want to, get that out to production providing value in a very short amount of time. What that enables us to do is we can take some calculated risks or scientific risks where, oh, maybe there's this new thing like AI and we should figure out how to put it in our project to really make our customers happy. Well, if it takes you 6 months to get that out to prod and theoretically providing value, that's a lot of risk. That's like half of a year to spend on something that may or may not provide value. But if you take 2 weeks or 4 weeks or maybe a couple sprints, like you get feedback quite a bit quicker, which allows you to take more risks. And when those risks don't pan out and it's maybe kind of a waste of time, it's a much smaller amount of time wasted. And not that it's necessarily wasted, but
Right, time and the whole, so if you do take the full 6 months, you're less likely to want to throw all that away and try something new. Because, you've spent so much, you've invested so much time and resources into it.
And the corollary there as well is back to benefit, right? So if I wait 6 months, it's 6 months before I realize any benefit from what I've delivered. But if I deliver something in 2 weeks, I at least get a little bit of benefit within 2 weeks. If my experiment ends up working and ends up delivering value, for example, rather than having to wait for 6 months.
right.
So,
And if you're in a market where there's a lot of different people and you're in 2 weeks can get something out there, whereas it takes, other company 6 months to get out there, well, then you've just hit the market, that much faster than everyone else.
sure, even if it's an internal app, right, it might just be a minor annoyance for 10 people, but that minor annoyance was, that you fixed in 2 weeks. That minor annoyance is now done, and you don't have 6 months of it, or 5.5 months of the minor annoyance, right? So you've just improved people's lives. They didn't have to wait for 6 months for the big bang. So
The big bang.
the big bang, yeah, big bang deployments. That's another way back. I'll talk to you about big bang deployments way back, or big bang migrations. That's another one. So
Just migrate it off.
the whole thing just comes into being all at once.
Oh man,
The whole
sounds fun.
Yeah, they were great times.
Last couple things on the third way. So we're taking more risks, smaller risks, but more of them. Another idea here, and this kind of goes to the learning, is elevating local discoveries, maybe that were learned through taking a risk, to global improvements. So maybe an example of this is one team in your company takes a risk and tries this new library and just learns that, oh, like this is actually super great and is providing a ton of value and we can move a lot quicker. Well, ideally, we're translating what that one team found to something that the whole organization can utilize. And maybe that's not a great example, but basically taking, what you learn at a small level and sharing it with everyone. Last two things here. This isn't one that I've really heard a lot, but it was mentioned. Improvement kata, basically that every day as you're doing your job, you're practicing, you're trying to learn, continue to learn and get better at it. One way that you can potentially do that is by allocating time for improvement. The most common suggestion I see is up to 20% of your time, and that's something that the company would be, culturally enforcing or allowing. Not always possible, but I guess it kind of just depends. but basically the main idea there is that you're not so at capacity as an individual contributor or developer that you never have time to, oh, like maybe I should think about this new tool or think about like what's coming down the pipeline for kind of software as a whole. And next thing you know, you're on like Python 2 because you never took the time to look into Python 3, and then you can't, migrate, or it's a big pain in the butt.
I think the other thing I think of when I think about culture, that I've had a lot of experience with is it's not just the culture of the dev and the ops team, it's the culture of let's say the whole life cycle. We talked about product management again. And, in my experience, a lot of times product management, they're always after the next feature. And you have to have a supportive culture where the product management team understands that, hey, they need to give the development team or the ops team a bit of breathing room to improve their processes, because they let them get better at delivering. They get their feature, they're going to end up with more features. And that, I've had the fortune of doing some of a lot of DevOps fast tracks where I go in for 2 weeks. And I've had a lot of good experiences where, that sort of 2-week time frame, it's like, give us 2 weeks to do something, and then let's talk about it at the end, so that, the ultimate point being that sometimes you can get some breathing room from, management, whether it's executives, product management, or, customer service, whoever's involved. Sometimes you can get breathing room, on a smaller cycle to show some improvement and get people, in the way, right? In the way of thinking, or out of the way of, you improving, but involved in, one of your ways, right? Of the culture, that they're not outsiders, that just they throw stuff over the features over the wall into the product team and the DevOps team. Now it's, 2 groups. No, it really needs to be everybody, ever expanding, so that, the whole business is included in that sort of mindset.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it seems where this one really, you can't hit this if it's not like a whole cultural thing.
Right.
At least very well.
Yeah, and you can't expect it, again, to happen at once, overnight, whatever. It's just a, slow thing, and, get little wins going, and, demonstrate what those wins mean. And again, we have various clients. We could talk about case studies, and we've had a particular struggle with one trying to get to enough runway to get, a new process out to save their team a bunch of time. And I know that, our customer, our primary point of contact was getting beat up from the customer service team. And, they never really gave themselves the right amount of time up front. Now, hopefully they're through that. I don't know. I've been out of vacation.
Yeah.
No, I still got fingers crossed over here, so we're not sure yet, but hey, whatever. So,
Yeah, I was just gonna add too that, I think these culture and the whole DevOps, movement, I guess, is even more important these days, because, there's that whole idea that software's eating the world, and all the companies are now software companies. And so, it feels like no matter what company you are, it's not just Google and Microsoft and Amazon. It's like any company can benefit.
yeah, or Flickr.
Yeah,
They're still out there.
yeah, there's still.
But, again, I think that's true. Like, every company has gone through, at some degree, varying degrees of success, this sort of cultural journey, and sometimes they don't even know it. But it's happening, within the dev teams. Again, that's probably the worst case scenarios, which are still good scenarios, where it only happens within the dev team or the ops team, and doesn't really get elevated. So,
yeah. The last thing I'll mention for the third way is just this idea, and this kind of ties back to something Reese mentioned, of blameless postmortems, so that it's not, well, I'll just go to the next slide. It's not this. It's not, oh, prod broke, and we got devs pointing at devs, we've got ops pointing at devs, and dev pointing at ops. Yeah, it's not a finger pointing game. The last idea of blameless postmortems is that we're all in this together. We're all trying to figure out what caused the issue and prevent it in the future, as one team, and hopefully being relatively open about what, the postmortem was, what caused the issue in prod, whether that's, just to your company as a whole, or even to your customers.
And this is a true story. Early on in my career, I was actually told by a senior dev that if I broke the build, they'll break my fingers.
Ouch.
I still got my fingers, so.
Yeah. So this is what we're trying to get away from. Reese and I were chatting this morning about, and he said that, I was like, oh, we should include that. That'd be great. There's a lot of talking. Let's take a step back real quick and just enjoy some pictures. So here we got Dev on the left, Ops on the right.
There's this wall in the way.
Dev commits, throws it over the wall to Ops. Ops seems to be unhappy now. Dev is throwing a lot over the wall now. Ops is very unhappy. Everything's in flames. You've got this wall in the middle that's getting easier to read with every passing day. So this is what we're trying to get away from. So after you come to this lunch and learn, this is where you want to end up. The bowl of gladness with Dev and Ops. And that other guy in the corner.
Security team's still trying to get.
Yeah, I don't know.
Look at that.
Someone forgot to invite him to the meetings.
That goes back to Phil's point that, it's not just Dev and Ops anymore, right? It's the whole business, the company.
Except security. Just
We
kidding.
gotta get those security guys.
This is not endorsed by Intelitech. And then, so this is, I keep saying this is the last thing, but this is the last thing that I will say is, this is a picture, I think it's called like the Golden Circle. It's from something that has nothing to do with DevOps, but it's a book called Start With Why by a guy named Simon Sinek. He also talks about it in one of his TED Talks, which is like in the top 3 or 4 TED Talks of all time. So maybe you've seen this before. But when Reese and I were planning this discussion and just thinking about it, I kept kind of popping into my mind that DevOps seems to me like it's really about the how. You think of an individual user story, an individual commit, pull request, whatever, something that you do just daily, that's a what. Like I solved this specific issue. But I think what DevOps is really trying to get at is how we're doing our work and how we're doing it in a way that's sustainable, that is measurable, that's consistent, that people can see into, sort of those non-functional requirements, but almost not so much about the software, but as like the culture. And then the why is, you got to figure that out. DevOps can't help you there. I don't, that transcends Agile or DevOps or anything, in my opinion, but.
I think it's important though. I mean, it elevates the DevOps discussion because again, even in this meetup group, so often we're talking about tools and tech, not about the why, which is, that business value. And I think that's often a challenge for the business. They want a particular feature. And, as the team that's responsible for building and deploying that feature, delivering it, we should all understand the why. What's the value? Why do we need this, right? That's why we build our user stories, as a so-and-so, I want to do something, what, so I can, the why am I doing this, right? And I think we've said 5 whys, at least in some meetings, you look up the 5 whys, it's like, you can't start with one. Typically you gotta, keep drilling in. And, sometimes the resistance, and this goes back to that cultural thing, it's a, sort of a sign of whether your culture is working or not. If you can engage with, your team, your group, the greater team, and be able to ask why and have that facilitate a good discussion, versus, you don't need to know why, just do what I told you to do. Okay, that's, that's anti DevOps. And again, DevOps, the bigger, grander, more higher level DevOps versus it's the CI/CD tool from, it's GitHub Actions or whatever. So anyway.
So this concludes the intro to DevOps that took way longer than it should have. These are all books.
Didn't.
It took just as long as
the
it
right
should.
amount of time. That's okay.
Yeah. These are some great books. We have some of these around the office. The Goal, which I talked about, the Theory of Constraints. This is one that I wanted to read. I haven't yet. It talks about the Toyota Way, or TPS, Toyota Production System, which was really all about lean. It's my understanding. Again, I haven't read it yet though.
Continuous improvement.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Casey. And then the other 2 were written by mostly some of the same authors, DevOps Handbook and the Phoenix Project. I mentioned this earlier, but Phoenix Project's really like kind of the novel, sort of the intro to DevOps if you're really new to it or just want a fun way to kind of learn more about it. The DevOps handbook is a handbook, not a story. Cool. With that, I'll hand it over to Reese.
All right, thanks.
Or, well, I don't know which time we have.
Yeah, so we have about 15 minutes. I think I can make it through most of the transformation part. I was going to talk about some of the tooling that AWS has, and you'll see some of that. So we'll see how far we get. But yeah, maybe we need to have a part 2 on this.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, what I would recommend, again, at 45, we want to do hour or less, and just focus the content. Like so, and I would say, hey, you know, if you have some intro that you think makes sense, great. I think also if there's discussion, you know, questions, concerns, you know, people who have, you know, horror stories or war stories, you know, does this resonate? Does it, you know, you have questions about it? I'd say, you know, allowing some time for discussion makes sense to me too.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, does anyone have any discussion points or questions or comments?
I just sent you a good page. Paul. The value I am.
Right.
Oh, that wasn't Casey.
Oh no. Did you send it in the chat or?
There is no chat for me.
Oh.
I'll send it to you via direct message in Teams.
Oh. Sorry about that. It's taking me a minute to find it. Give me a minute. Okay. There we go. Sorry it took me so long. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up.
And
Just keep throwing it over the wall. But ops is like the last point, I guess, right? Oops, if I can get this down. So yeah, then I guess if there's no other discussion points, let me see real quick.
How much did I get wrong for the people who experienced it? I'd be curious. Because I feel like I was kind of like looking back into the past without really knowing
I
it.
can't say you got it wrong.
no,
Brought up horror stories. You brought up, you like picked at that scab that we wanted to leave there. Yeah, we were okay not having it picked at.
Were there big events that you would say contributed to sort of, you know, I went through a brief timeline, but probably, you know, there's some decade-long gaps where I just pretended nothing ever happened. But
well, I mean, none of it's like a turning point in time. It existed, but there's still companies that don't implement DevOps. I mean, shoot, one of our clients
Here's one.
is finally moving over and is doing more than 2 releases a year. And that's been the work of a few individuals that work there. It's not so much that they needed DevOps to exist. They needed somebody to bring it in and to champion the idea of DevOps or of continuous deployment or any of those topics. It really takes somebody to champion it and to show the value to leadership, because without leadership's buy-in, there ain't nothing happening.
Yeah. Wow. I don't think
Right.
I don't know if anyone could have put that better. Like that was, yeah. I went through an experience too, so it's just like, it was very difficult to try to get people who, you know, like you feel like you lose so much control when you bring something that's like a very manual process. You start, you know, trying to apply some of the, you know, concepts of CI/CD. They think they're going to lose control when in reality they're actually in the game a lot.
Mhm.
And, you know, because, you know, all that time that they're spending doing manual processes can actually be invested into CI/CD. Peter's going to do it perfectly every time.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, so I think like that's just like, you know, like getting someone in there who is going to be the kind of like the igniter, the person who's going to actually drive that change.
Mm.
So like finding the one person, or like hopefully it's going to be multiple people who subscribe to it. But yeah, there at least has to be one person who thinks it's a good idea to get started. There's probably a lot of companies out there that don't have that yet.
They also
Yeah, I would-
have a lot of patience.
Patience, and I think that's a good word, and I think, you know, you have to have patience, because a lot of times you're dealing with people who are afraid of change for whatever reason, like hey, this is new stuff and I don't know it, so I'm gonna lose my job, you know, sort of thing. So you do have to, you know, be patient and work with people and sort of get them over the hump, and then get them to see, you know, get them to see the value. And, you know, a lot of times it will start with one, then it goes to two, and maybe, you know, there's somebody who's sort of bought in, you know, who might be a leader or a manager. And, you know, it can be a tough, long road to hoe, but, you know, you got to start somewhere sometimes. So, you know, I think, it's, you know, there's nothing wrong, right? I mean, a lot of companies are doing this. A lot of companies think they're doing it, but they're not. You know, like the Scrum fall or whatever, you know, they have a bunch of stories and they have Scrums and, oh, we're agile just because we're using, you know, DevOps, but there's nothing agile about anything that they're doing. So.
Yeah, that reminds me of, it seems like the trend, or through my experience, what I've seen is, it seems like with the agile, people are more involved, or more adopting like the tooling and or not the tooling, but like the ceremonies and like, you know, we're doing the meetings and this kind of thing, but not focusing on the engineering principles and the tooling, versus DevOps seems to be more about the tooling and the automation, but not as much about the soft part of it, you know, the culture and the people.
Yeah.
Without having the holistic, like, you know, if the business and the developers aren't like aligned, it doesn't seem to work as well. I remember I worked at one company where we tried to do the whole agile thing from the developers up, and you can only get so far before, if the business doesn't buy into it, it's just like this, you can do it, but it's just so much harder, and it's just like everything's like an uphill battle. It feels like.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like that's a really good point too. So if you have all the tooling there, it's like, I have Kanban. We're doing our, you know, like our daily stand-ups. Why isn't this agile? It's like, you know, like, you know, like, what are you doing during your stand-ups? Like, what are you actually doing with your user stories and stuff like that? And that's like where the actual, you know, that's where you get cultural pushback, because, you know, they might have felt like they were doing it really well for a long time, because, you know, things were flowing through and they still saw things. They saw some of like some of those information, you know, anyways, those like products of Scrum, the Scrum artifacts and stuff like that. But they're not actually very accurate, because like, how much of that stuff's getting returned? How much of that stuff's actually going through refinement? How much of that? And that's where the cultural kind of thing comes in, because that stuff does take more time. And so if you have a company that's very driven by, you know, like, I want to see improvements quickly, I want to see new iterations really quickly, but I don't really care for the, you know, the content of it, you end up, you know, trying to get people to understand. It's like, well, we weren't doing it correctly for a long time. Now we're trying to switch over to actually doing it the actual Scrum manner. That's where, like, you know, again, so that's where the actual culture stuff comes into play. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, for me, one of the biggest things I've noticed recently was, and not that you got your slides wrong, your slides were great, but you're right, before you kind of threw it over the wall. Now it's, I wouldn't even say we've got two people in the boat anymore. I mean, my job as a developer has changed so much to where I'm responsible for doing the development, plus the deployment, plus, I mean, you are doing the ops side too. And it's amazing how much that role has actually become one role that a lot of people take on, instead of, hey, I've got this, now I hand it to QA, okay? Now they've got that, now they hand it to the deployment people that are responsible for spinning up the machines. It's like, no, that one person is not necessarily QA, but that one person is almost doing the whole life cycle. It's not really two people anymore, which that's kind of been just a huge learning curve on my end, just trying to figure out, no, I'm not just writing a DOS C program anymore. I now have to worry about other things too. So
now that you have to deal with it, you fix it. It really is interesting to think about. I mean, was the books that you mentioned and process improvement in general, because I used to have a design background and worked on a marketing team, and you see a similar wall form between, I'm a product, I do the design work, I built this thing, I put so much time into getting these specs ready for you. Here you go, now just go build it. And so it's interesting, because on the other side of that, we had a lot of control about working together technically to figure that out. But I think that's where a lot of businesses think they're agile, but they're not, is that they are still putting that wall. It's just in a different spot, but they think it's not. And then I think also the lead with why, they don't explain well, here's how we got to this solution. Here's the solution, go build it. So if you have any questions or feedback, your feedback loop is very closed initially. Not all places do that, but it's something I've seen at, 3 or 4 places that I've worked. It's really that wall just shifted back more towards the defining process instead of the implementation process, which ultimately causes the same problem, just in a different way, right?
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, so I brought up this slide here. This is just like a typical CI/CD pipeline. The reason why I brought it up is because it kind of shows you without having all the words, the sort of the progression that we've gone through as a software industry, right? In the beginning, it was like you were modern if you could do CI, if you had continuous integration set up. That was like, wow, you're on the leading edge of stuff.
You're doing automated builds.
Yeah, automated builds. I mean, that was a big deal, right? And then we got to a point where it was like, okay, now we got to do something with this. We got all this shiny software, but until it gets out to our customers, they can't really do anything. And so then that kind of leads you to the continuous delivery, where you're not. So I guess the main difference between continuous delivery and deployment is the deployment is fully automated. There's no touch points. That's what that little screen is, sort of like a approval state, right? Where you get it to a certain point, usually right before production, and then it's like, okay, we got to get sign offs or whatever, the stakeholders have to have seen it, or sign off something, or in various levels of formality, I guess you could say, to the point where if you want to be iterating, from I wrote some code on my machine to as soon as I check it in, it goes through the full process and then doesn't need a approval gate, right? It just goes and flows through production, and there's automated testing. Maybe it runs in a blue or a blue-green environment or whatever, where it does all these automated tests, and as soon as those pass, everything looks good, and you don't even need a human at that point, other than the end person using the software.
Awesome. Good stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, we got like 7 minutes. If anybody has any other questions, or if we just want to call it, it sounds like we're going to do part 2.
What are you doing the 4th Tuesday of July?
Yeah. Sounds like a lunch of mine. So, all right. I guess that's it. Thanks for everyone for coming, and hopefully you learned something. So, all right.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you.